Hello, my warm welcome to each of you for this session of One Future, the Global Governance for Children. We are very glad to receive, for the closing of the 2022 World Conference, two world references who can help us to deepen our reflection and our capacity of envision global learning processes committed with the ongoing transformation in our planet. Dr. Peter SENGE, Senior Lecturer of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is also founder of SOL, Society for Organizational Learning, and co-founder of the Center for Systems Awareness. Dr. SOBHI TAWIL is UNESCO Future of Learning and Innovation Director. He worked for the International Bureau of Education and the International Commission of Red Cross in Geneva, and conducted many research on education in war and conflict areas. To anchor Dr. Peter Senge's presentation, with Cristina, she is member of the board of this conference and founder of the SOL Brazil. I wish you all a very inspiring session. Thank you.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for accepting our invitation to be a keynote speaker at the WeCon 2022 conference. We are very deeply thankful for that. And the theme that we'll be exploring is challenging and complex. It's global and local communities collectively creating change for the common good. And I guess we could start with an essential question, which is well known in many traditions, cultures, and countries. And it says that it takes a village to raise a child, which means, I suppose, that although a child is born from biological parents, no family is an island, and the whole of the community should be responsible for the education, the care, the health, the protection, and the harmonic development of the children. Could you guide us on this reflection?
Well, it's a phrase that I've kind of known for a long time, and it's a good place to start because, at least for me, it's been an anchor of sorts as a point of reference. I have no idea, but my guess would be, in one way or another, most cultures around the world have an idea like that. And I think it's a very old idea. And the reason to me why this idea seems so transcendent, overarching, as a point of real guidance for us all, is two things. The obvious one is, children need many adults in their lives.
Yeah.
I've always thought that the nuclear family, the two-parent family, is a kind of a unworkable system long-term. And it only develops, fairly recently in human history, because in most of human history, we were tribal, right? And we were raised collectively in a world of many adults and many different children. And that tribal kind of context, to me, has always seemed like the foundation for real education. The biological birthing of kids is, in some sense, almost coincidental. It happens.
I agree with you.
All species have to create, the incentives for biological reproduction in whatever form those incentives are experienced. We know very well as human beings what the incentives feel like. But that's more of a biological requirement rather than a social reality. So I've always thought it's a real touch point. And the second aspect of it, though, which I think is less obvious to people, is the importance for the village, not just for the children. Because when we sever our connection with children as humans, as adult humans, we lose something that it's impossible for us to see. By and large, since this reality has not been the norm in most of our societies, we have a situation where we've lost something we don't even know we've lost.
Yeah.
And the something to me is the kind of continual interaction, the living together with children, the energy, the joy, the sense of reciprocal learning, because I think that's the first principle of all learning vis-a-vis adults and kids, is that the adults learn as much as the kids. And any good teacher will tell you that. You know, yes, I really enjoy teaching, but I learn as much from my students as they learn from me. And this is, you might say, the first systems principle of education, that education at its best is reciprocal. It's about adults and children really growing and learning together. And you see that embedded in some of the modern education systems. And when I say modern now, I mean, last 100 to 150 years. The Steiner school tradition, the Waldorf school tradition. That's kind of a cornerstone, adults and children learning together. So I think that's the other side of the takes a village that is not so obvious to people.
I feel that what you're saying, that this mutual connection and learning together in the last centuries were not natural. It has to be pushed and insisted, and you have to develop theories saying that this is very good. So it doesn't come naturally as in a tribe or in a community, old traditional communities.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great
but it is still in us, because that tribal consciousness is still obviously in us. Look at how quickly, when we're under stress, we create a tribe. Now, unfortunately, in today's world, it tends to work very counterproductively. So we just find a bunch of people who we agree with, and that kind of gives us a sense of security when we feel under threat or fear. So I'm just saying that I think we're still tribal. And the real question is how to use those instincts well, not poorly.
Yeah, wow. And but what do you think, like, for one individual now, and you think of any individual, and it's so natural, but to feel responsible and care for children that were not born within his or her family, and children that are not close in the neighborhood, it's necessary to deeply experience interconnection with others, and also to feel interconnected with the consequences of our actions at a much greater distance in time and space and geography. So then I believe that this requires what you've been working for a long time and insisting on that, which is system awareness and compassion. And I would love you to develop and expand on system awareness. And also, is it compassion a very essential component of system awareness?
Well, I think it is. The reason system awareness has been so central in our work for a long time is that it's you might say, an ecological mandate at this point.
Yeah,
it's always true. If you look at the history of different cultures, and let's just say different tribal traditions, there's very, very many, of course, millions, literally. And some of them live for a long time. Some tribal cultures last for tens of thousands of years, obviously, and many don't. And I think one of the defining features of those that do and those that don't is, do they develop, you might say, cultural norms, ways of living that keep them in harmony with their larger ecological system? Or do they develop ultimately a more self-centered or even tribal-centered exploitative view? So I think today, one simple way to characterize our predicament in the world is humans are attempting a historic experiment, which is, can we live with the world as our niche? So all living occurs in niches. That's a biological principle. All organisms survive or fail to survive in a niche. And that's the same true of cultures. Historically, it's mostly been local niches. Now, for the first time, as best any of us know, this is a society that's trying to live in truly the world, the globe as a whole, the world ecosystem as a niche. This requires a totally different type of awareness.
Sure.
So that's kind of the historical genesis or rationale for our emphasis on systems thinking. And we've tended to expand that the last 5 years or so to systems awareness, because the cognitive or thinking part of it is important, but not adequate. And compassion is a good term for kind of pointing out the other aspects of it, which is much more a lived experience, a feeling sense. The word compassion comes from a Latin root. It literally means being with the experience of the other. You could say the suffering of the other, but that's maybe a little bit negative. It does include being with the suffering of the other, but being with the experience of the other, just being there, so that the lived experience of another becomes really real to me. People might say, well, isn't that empathy? Yes, to a degree. The way we, in the development of this whole compassionate systems approach, which has been kind of co-developed by me and Meta Bowl, who's a biologist, a colleague at MIT and a biologist, is to appreciate that empathy is an innate capacity. We are a social species. By definition, social species are empathic. Think about your dogs, right? Think of how empathic dogs are with humans. Yeah. That's why they have co-evolved with humans. So empathy is the ability to feel another's feelings. That is like breathing. That's like innate in us. Compassion is more a cultivated state, something you work at, so that you can kind of build on that innate capacity to experience the other's experience, but to be with it. So the subtlety of this definition, being with the suffering of the other, is the being part, not the awareness, because it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the other's experiences. We all know this as parents. You just get completely overwhelmed by fear for your kids, because you know your kids are feeling badly, whatever. Easy to just react. In other words, someone's angry and you react, or someone's really sad and you want to help them. So that's different than being with. Being with is literally to create the space in our own experience that another's experience can be present, period, just present. So that we are not emotionally hijacked or emotionally governed to react to it, but we can be aware of it. So usually it's a little bit like that, primal brain function of fight or flight. Usually when we encounter difficult emotions, we either want to run or we want to react, as opposed to just being with. So the trick to compassion is it really literally means being with the experience of the other. And the being with part is a lifelong journey of developing that capacity to just be present. Now, of course, different religious traditions make a big deal about compassion, Christian traditions, Buddhist traditions. And the reason for that is, one, it's reinforcing our sense of how to develop a community and connection with each other. But secondly, it's a lifelong journey. It takes real work. You have to really build a capacity to be sensitive or aware of the other's experience, but not be overwhelmed by it. So you might say compassion brings the idea of systems awareness back to us as individuals.
And also, you mentioned a lot in your work, system sensing together with system thinking, right? Which is one is cognition, and the other is feeling, is connectedness, which is the sensing. But is it possible, Peter, that like you feel this in this compassion that's the aim of our work, that we communities share their work and their experiences with a country that's, you know, far away. So is it possible that this compassionate state would really be present if for me to want to share my experience with the community in Asia or Africa or whatever? Never thought of this, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think that what tends to happen is we become sentimental. What I mean by sentimental is we idealize it. You know, we feel like we should feel that, and maybe we really want to feel that. But as I think about your question, it comes back to me to the role of children. I think it's very natural to feel a sense of genuine compassion, connection with children wherever they are. And you think about it. Think about the nonprofit organizations who have used raising money to help children elsewhere as a key strategy. They want to do that. They see a child suffering, doesn't matter where they are. And you think about what's going on there. I think biologically speaking, we really don't distinguish in some sense whose child it is. There's something in us at a very, very fundamental level. That's why I'm using the term biologically speaking.
Yeah.
I think at a very fundamental level that we feel a sense of connection to, love for, and concern about children, period. It doesn't matter whose children they are, and it really doesn't even matter where they are. So if you think about it that way, really making the children kind of the center of our attention could be a very high leverage strategy for developing system awareness at the global level, practically, emotionally, because of that emotional connection with children. It's not just an intellectual thing.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful, because it's really, when you're talking, I'm feeling like a kind of, you know, my heart gets really warm hearing to you talking about it. I can feel this this sentiment for children that all over, you know, the idea that the child is suffering in some place really, you know,
Right.
gets really deep in my heart. That's you know.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, because you know it's such a fundamental sense of connection and caring and responsibility. And you know, if you ask, well, what do we really need in the world? Well, we need that. We need fundamental sense of caring and responsibility that's collective at a scale that's commensurate with living together on the planet.
Yeah, and wow, and you know, what do we need to learn and practice individually and collectively to accomplish this purpose of connection, of communities being a reality around the globe? That you know, because this has to be very practical also. Like at WeCon, we have to. The idea is to make available resources and experiences and methodologies and theories or whatever for people to share, and not to start from zero again. If you're starting somewhere, or even a community that's 50 kilometers, as I told you before, you know, 50 kilometers, and you don't know what they're doing, and you start everything again from zero. So this idea of sharing, what do we need to learn and to share this compassionate systems change that we grow locally, hoping to achieve a profound global impact?
Well, I mean, first off, we have maybe pause for a minute and think about what we mean by global. So global is a word in English that's actually a little more ambiguous than people often think. And I think, well, it's all about the world, but it also means everywhere. Global problems are everywhere. So global by its nature includes local. It's not different. Global includes local, exactly. So the health and well-being of our children is a global issue. I mean, we have a global epidemic, which is everywhere, around teenage suicides. It is now one of the biggest causes of death. I think the biggest cause of death for young people in the world. Depression, anxiety. There was a recent study published in Nature, the physics journal, on the anxiety of teenagers around the world about climate change. So that's obviously a global issue, which is very local. So again, so I think that what we have to learn first off is that this is already a global phenomenon. It's going on everywhere. So we're already connected in a very, you might say, non-productive way. We're creating conditions around the world that are creating great anxiety and stress for young people around the world. We do a lot of work in the province of British Columbia. And one of the reasons is it's the most advanced province or state level effort in the world around social emotional learning, really for 30 years. And they actually track the well-being of all children in the province on a public database, which is amazing. Nobody else in the world does this. And they have the data to show that for 20 years, the well-being of children is declining, despite the effort of enormous support being supported by the ministry and by all the schools to really make social emotional development central.
That's amazing, Peter, because, you know, I saw their experience in that event that we had, you know, that they presented at the Paris event. And it was such a beautiful experience, so well structured with the government, with, you know, the Minister of Education and everyone involved, and still the well-being is declining.
That's right. So it's an important reminder to us, if that's occurring there, where there's such an effort to focus on well-being, we can be up just about 100% certain it's occurring everywhere. So it's a little bit of not a very pleasant thing, but to your question, what do we need to learn? We need to just start by telling the truth. We have created conditions in the world today where the well-being of our children is in decline, probably more than we realize. And that truth is important for us to hold, because it is a perfect example of the consequences of the way we adults are living our lives. There has another implication, which I think is very important, particularly for educators, but I would say for educators and parents and everybody concerned about school, the institution of school. The credibility of adults to design and run schools that'll do a good job of educating kids, the credibility of adults to do this is at an all-time low. Kids look at the conditions of the world. They look at the political divisiveness. They look at the chaos socially, the suffering, the inequity, the extraordinary poverty. They look at climate change and they go, that's what you've done? You adults? Yeah. And you're now going to teach us what we need to learn so we can do more of what you've done? So that's the consciousness that children naturally have, because children are not stupid. They can see what's going on in the world. And of course, unlike any time in human history, they have a level of awareness of the conditions in the world that children have never had before. So we have to then recognize that, well, this is, you might say, in my opinion, like the first imperative to really have fundamental transformation in education. We have to give up the notion that school, education in general, is a system designed by adults and run by adults and done to kids. That's the way it's worked historically. Because adults felt they had the responsibility and the authority, not just the responsibility, which is an inner feeling, but the authority. That's our job. We have to educate our kids. No, I would say today the mandate really shifts. How do adults and children learn together to create well-being in their communities, individually and collectively? And if we as adults can't recognize the simple fact that we don't know the answer to that question, our skills and capabilities are really quite questionable in that domain, so that maybe we have to learn together with the kids how to do this. At MIT, the lingo they use for this amongst the educational innovators is co-design. You know, adults and children co-designing the learning. And of course, that makes really good sense because it's very respectful. It's going to be more engaging. Kids will feel more responsibility for their own learning. But that's the first developmental step. We have to give up the idea that we can design curriculum, design the tests, and then impose it all on kids. No one asks children, what do you want to learn? Right? That's not the way school works. Yeah. Here's what you're going to learn. Why? So because I'm an authority and I know what you need to learn. And all I'm saying is that the credibility of that statement today is at an all-time low.
And also, this is so fragile because, you know, with the world changing just about, every year, you design something that's fixed for the children to learn and to develop it. It's so fragile and so crazy, but I'm thinking, hearing you, that it should be the other way around. I mean, not what do we adults have to learn, but what we have to learn from the kids.
Right.
Not from an academia or from any authority, but what we have to learn from the kids to
together.
Really,
I mean, I think if you start off with an acknowledgement of ignorance, it's a real simple. It's kind of obvious. We do not know how to live together on this planet, period. The evidence for that statement is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Therefore, none of us have the answer. And, you might say that the task of education, if you flip this around, is, how does education become a vehicle for us, adults and children and young people, learning together? How do we slow and reverse climate change? How do we reverse the destruction of species? How do we make an impact on the extraordinary inequity in the world? We take whatever big issues we're concerned about. That's education. Now you bring that back to the local level, because it's got to be local in some sense. Again, global includes local. So what does that mean here? How do we engage kids right here, right now, in eliminating plastics in my community, in really engaging children who are poor and don't have opportunities, really being part of a community-wide undertaking to benefit, to create well-being in the community. I've seen kids involved in stuff like this, and guess what? When that happens, they love education. I remember years ago visiting a school in quite an arid area where the kids had developed a system where they kept track of all the water used in the school. They had charts on all the walls, and they literally kept track, the bathrooms, the water fountains, and they loved this because it was something they could do, and then they could see if they were actually doing better at reducing the amount of water that they were using. And that's education. It was a sense of, they understood the science. Even though they were like 8, 9, 10 years old, they understood where water comes from, where it goes, the engineering, and obviously the economics. So then they had to say, well, why do we waste so much water? Well, we're not paying for the water we waste. So all of a sudden, the learning becomes very real for them because it's a global issue that's arising locally, and they're working together with the adults to see what they can do about this.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry we have to end this conversation because, we could go on talking for hours about this, but, we have this limited time, and I have to thank you for your help, your wisdom, and, and also your generosity in always being available to share with us whatever you learned, and to create motivation all over the globe for people to act and be committed to this beautiful transformation. Well, Peter, thanks a lot. It was good, always talking to you. Yeah.
It always is.
Yeah, bye now.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yes, very pleased to present some of the main ideas in UNESCO's report, the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, report entitled Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education. And I'd like to just start by saying something about the nature of the report. I think important to make that clear from the outset, that the report is not intended as a blueprint for what needs to be done in education as we look to the future, but rather as a provocation, an inspiration, a provocation for public debate and dialogue, an inspiration to innovate, an invitation to question our understandings of education, of its purpose, of how education works. So I say that because the report was released in November of last year, 2021, but it was 2 years in the making. And during that time, there was an international commission that was working, deliberating on a set of issues around challenges for the future and the implications for knowledge, learning, and education as we look to the future. But while the commission worked, from the outset, we had a broad process of public consultation with a range of constituencies. At the time, very open consultation about how youth, students, parents, teachers, civil society organizations, members of and public officials, how they saw the future, what fears and what hopes for the future, and how they thought this would translate into education and what needs to be changed in education. So it really is an invitation. Just wanted to start a provocation, an invitation to debate, and an inspiration for innovation. So not a closed document, and we'll come back to this at the very end, and to the idea of reimagining our futures together as a process. Second, important to say that this type of exercise of looking at the bigger picture is something that UNESCO has been doing over the decades, taking key moments of historical change, rapid transformation, societal transformation, and posing the larger questions of the purpose of education, the nature of learning, for what type of society, for what type of future. And the first time UNESCO did this was now 50 years ago in the late 60s. And this gave rise to the report in 1972, Learning to Be. And late 60s, early 70s, a time of turmoil, social, civic, political unrest, national independence movements, women's rights movement, civil rights movements, a time of questioning modes of organization of power and values transmitted in society. It was also a time of hope, strong belief actually in hopeful about the future, and a strong belief in science and scientific progress. It was also a time, just to recall, of the Cold War, with two diametrically opposed models of development, but both really grounded in this optimistic view of the future and the promises of science and scientific progress. The second moment was early 1990s, so just after the end of the Cold War, a time of intensification of globalization, a time of, it was just the very beginnings of the internet. And the similar exercise was undertaken by UNESCO with the commission headed by Jacques Delors at the time, and which gave rise to the publication in 1996, the report of the commission, the Delors Commission, Learning the Treasure Within. What was perhaps the most influential notion, idea, was that of the four pillars of education: learning to be, learning to do, learning to know, and learning to live together. And the one that probably attracted the most interest politically and among educators was learning to live together. it was this focus on the role of education in strengthening social cohesion, in more inclusive citizenship, in opening to diversity of cultures and intercultural understanding. This was 1996. And now this report, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education, released, as I said, last year. We could say that this moment is a moment that is marked perhaps first by the recognition of the complex and interdependent dimensions of development. We do have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is a recognition that our challenges are shared, north and south, are interconnected, are complex. In terms, and it's true that when the work of the International Commission on the Futures of Education was initiated in 2019, just before the outbreak of COVID, many did ask the question, why do we need to rethink education now? Haven't we set global goals and targets with the 2030 Agenda, in particular, Sustainable Development Goal 4 around education? We have set goals and targets for 2030, so why rethink education now? And the starting point really of the Reimagining Our Futures Together is a recognition of the dual challenge that education is confronted with today. On one hand, we have continued exclusion, continued unfulfilled promises of the right to basic education for all, just looking at shares of children, youth who are out of school, looking at the shares of adults who are non-literate still today, and despite progress. And this tends to be the most economically marginalized and vulnerable populations that are excluded, or those that are historically excluded for cultural, political reasons. So we have on one hand this legacy of exclusions, and that doing more of the same in education will not solve these problems. We cannot simply invest more and do more. There are questions, fundamental questions to be asked about our models, about our approaches in education. That's one piece of the dual challenge. The second piece is that the social outcomes, the development outcomes of education are perhaps also part of the problem that we find ourselves today in. Looking at the environment, for example, the fact that it is the more developed, more educated societies, more educated individuals that are the ones who are contributing most to climate change. So there is also something to be examined and critically examined in terms of the content and process of learning and its contribution to the reproduction of inequalities, of exclusions, transmission of bias and discrimination across generations, contribution to degradation of our environment and to climate change in particular. So the second piece of the challenge is, how do we unlock the transformational potential of education? And for both these reasons, we need to transform education. That is the starting point in the framing of the Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract, reports of the International Commission on the Futures of Education. Excuse me. The proposal made in the report is as the subtitle clearly states, a new social contract for education, the need to forge a new social contract for education. And what the report does is provides this social contract is understood both as a vision and a process. The vision based on the reaffirmation of education as a public endeavor, a common good, a reaffirmation of the right to education as a fundamental right. And thirdly, a vision founded on or grounded in the recognition of the diversity of ways of knowing, experiencing the world, conceptions of human well-being, the diversity of knowledge systems that need to be recognized, and all leveraged in response to the increasingly complex development challenges ahead. So that's for the vision. A number of proposals are made in terms of the what, the how of learning around curriculum. That curriculum and curriculum design should increasingly move towards greater interdisciplinarity, intercultural understanding, more focus on ecological issues. In terms of pedagogies, the pedagogies traditionally educational trajectories are seen as individual trajectories of competition, selection, ranking, and that pedagogy is the proposal here is that pedagogy should be encouraging and promoting cooperation and solidarity. This has many implications for the way we teach and learn, the way we organize learning groups. In terms of teaching, that the teaching profession should be seen as a collaborative profession, fully supported with opportunities for professional development and socially valued. There is no transformation of education without addressing the key issue of the teaching profession, the working conditions, and the social status of teachers. One of the final and maybe important proposals is around schools, that schools need to be protected as unique social sites. We've seen this during the period of disruption caused by COVID, that no matter what deployment of distance learning, no matter what access to that, to these distance learning opportunities, nothing replaces the social and physical space of schools in particular as the foundations for broader educational ecosystems. So schools to be protected, but they must be transformed. They must be transformed by connecting them to the really network of learning spaces around, be they social, cultural, professional spaces of learning, be they physical or virtual. And perhaps a word on digital and digital learning. One of the main ideas in the report proposed around the virtual world is that decisions, the use, the understanding and the use, decisions around the use of technology and digital technology in education must be made. These decisions must be part of the physical, the public sphere. Key decisions about digital technologies as they relate to education have to be made in the public space. and guided by principles of education as a public endeavor, as a common good, as a collective responsibility. And building on that, I could mention the Declaration on Connectivity for Education that was adopted in December 2021, and the key principles that should help steer the digital transformation of education. That it is much of the dominant discourse is around accelerating the digital transformation of education. What is key, and I think inspired by the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, is that this transformation needs to be steered. And the declaration, the Rewired Declaration on Connectivity in Education, adopted in December 2021, proposes three principles that can guide this transformation. First, that we must center the most marginalized. We've seen with the COVID experience, regardless of efforts made to deploy distance learning and digital learning in particular, that this not only exposed inequalities, but supercharged them. In fact, a survey internationally of the evidence shows that most children and youth did not have access to any kind of digital learning during the period of school closures. We also learned during COVID that even those that did have access to remote digital learning, that the learning process itself was impoverished, if we want. There was less engagement, less achievement academically, and that generally it narrowed the educational experience, because education is not just about the pursuit of academic course of study, but it is also about the social, civic, even political learning that happens in interaction with others and in interaction of the school with its environment. So the first principle of the declaration is center the most marginalized. Most of the innovation in edtech traditionally benefits more privileged teachers and students, and in the hopes that this will trickle down and become more accessible to all. The principle here is to say, let's reverse things. Let us focus on the most excluded, the most vulnerable. If the solutions work for them, then it will be much easier to scale this out and fairer to scale this out to others. The second principle is that we need to expand our investment in free public digital content. And this, again, we saw during COVID, that countries that were less well prepared, teachers, students, parents had to scramble to find materials that were not always free, often produced by commercial providers, not necessarily aligned with national curricula, and not always up to standard in terms of protection, safety, and protection of privacy. So the second principle is really about the need to strengthen public digital learning platforms and content, and UNESCO and UNICEF are soon launching an initiative focused in particular on this principle, an initiative entitled Gateways to Public Digital Learning, with a focus on the strengthening and improvement of public digital learning platforms and content. And the third principle to say that we can have connectivity, we can have content to be connected to, but there's still the pedagogical aspect. And it's not only about having the digital learning skills, but making the most use pedagogically of digital resources. This requires new paradigms. We're often in the paradigm of one device, one connected device per learner. There is much that can be done with a group of learners around one connected device, and connecting that group to other groups. There is interesting innovations that could be brought in to enrich social and civic learning. But there are also important issues around protection of data privacy, both for teachers and learners, and ensuring safety. So there is, beyond the technical skills, we often hear about digital skills and the need to strengthen digital skills of learners and teachers. It's really about digital literacy, competencies, critically understanding and being able to use digital learning opportunities in a safe and meaningful way. Coming back and to end, the Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education, as I said, is not a blueprint. It is not a guide on how to or what to do, but an invitation to forge together, to critically examine our models, our approaches, our ways of doing, and this at all levels, whether it's at the policy level, at the level of institutions, at the level of teachers, of learners, of parents and communities. It's an invitation to engage with these questions as part now of the dynamic around transforming education. The report has become a key reference for the UN Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit. The summit in September 2022 is not an endpoint, but really, in a way, a starting point to encourage this dynamic of critical re-examination and redefining the contours of what a new educational culture would look like in particular contexts. And this report, we hope, the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, will continue to serve that purpose going forward. Thank you very much.
We are very grateful to Peter SENGE, SOBHI TAWIL, and all the speakers of the 2022 WICON conferences. In our 3 days learning journey, we were reminded that the planet is a physical energy body, an interconnected living organism and a state of consciousness that potentialized by the workings of the global brain. Remind of the possibilities created by technology and the need for cooperation, including all the main actors, to find effective answers for the basic human urgencies. How technology and expertise can be mobilized for doing good for children, their families, and communities. Next, we are guided to reflect on how the opening of the global heart implies developing a wider vision of our connectedness, concept supported today by the leading sciences. Reflect on the challenges face education to become an effective agent for global transformation. On the fundamental importance for all educators to help children and youth to develop contact to their deep source of wisdom and power, the divine spark within that is common to each human being. Also an example of how to plant seeds of human unity inside the world, healing the past and creating together with the young generations centered in communities of hope. Today, we heard insights and guiding principles of how education can be designed to favor and promote learning together processes, to become open systems for a continuous co-creation of adults and children. Global questions are present in daily life of people in their local communities. Global governance for children can be seen as the process of developing learning communities, resilient, creative, self-organized, with shared decision-making process and global cooperation. We have from UNESCO a comprehensive global local agenda and principles for action to nurture our conversation and inspiring transformative initiatives in education. Reaching to the end, our heartfelt thanks to our partners that are constructing together the conference, and to the executive board, in special Jane Oliveira, Silvia Torrecilas, Victor Ades. Representing our partners, we will hear from Simone RAMOUNOULOU and ARTUR BERBERIAN, directors of the Antakarana Institute, as well as the words from Valentine GIRAUD and Bruna Immediato, representing the young generations that will be carrying on the torch of peace and happiness to all of us. I hope these programs can continue to be useful and inspiring to you and to your work. We are very honored by your presence. Thank you.
Hello, I am Simone RAMOUNOULOU from Instituto Antakarana, Willis Harman House, and also from Peaceglobalnet. What we learned during those 20 years? We have learned that education is knowledge and it is not information. Education is responsibility and cooperation and is not competition. Education is love and joy and is not a challenge. Those values have to come all together under one unique umbrella, the umbrella of oneness, one life, one humanity, one purpose for unity. So, closing the last 20 years, we are offering you those reflections for the next 20 years. With our gratitude, love, and joy to you all around the world. Bye-bye. See you in more 20 years. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Artur Berberian Filho, and I am an educator. Life is a game. I live my life this way, and I can see the excessive value that the modern society places on competition. We've been competing in places with people and at times that we shouldn't, as that was the single best choice available. My invitation to the future generations is to transform life into a cooperative game with a structure where participants play with each other, not against each other. Play to overcome challenges and do not to defeat others. You play to enjoy the game and for the pleasure of the playing. This is a game where cooperative effort is needed to achieve a common goal and not for mutually exclusive ends. It seeks to promote everyone's interaction and participation, and to allow spontaneity, the joy of playing, and trust in oneself. Every type of game has an intention that goes beyond the limits of the field and the board. So it is important to understand what values are behind the games and what kind of purpose the activities are serving. The essential purpose of life is to collaborate in building better world for everyone without exceptions. Play a cooperative life and leave this world better than you found it. Gratitude.
Hello there, my name is Valentine Giraud. I'm originally from Brazil, calling in today from California. Invited by Simone, I'm here to speak on behalf of my grandfather, Thomas Macrae, who was involved in the early beginnings of this project, but also in the name of the current generations and the future generations. So I'm honored to be here and speak in the name of this legacy. I cannot not mention that as I'm standing here today, we are living in a world that is seeing and experiencing the resurgence of right-wing extremism, who in and of itself place really little value on creativity and the creativity that derives from diversity, from collaboration, from cooperation. And that made me think of a quote from Edgar Mitchell, the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. According to Mitchell, we need to make the world safe for creativity and intuition, for it is creativity and intuition that will make the world safe for us. So as we're standing here to celebrate and to close 20 years of this amazing project, I want to remind us to keep on working together, to give the opportunity for people to feel safe in this world by giving kids and youngsters the opportunity to develop their creativity, their intuition, their citizenship, their ingenuity, and make this world a better, safer place for all of us. Thank you.
Every now and then, I question myself. Are we really going to be able to change the world? Will there be a point in time where people live differently, with more peace, more happiness? And I do believe that a lot of you will be able to relate to this what-if side of me. Because we put a lot of love, energy, and effort to make this a better place. And I have to say that working with children gave me a lot of hope, made me happy inside. Because the world through their eyes is very different already. We, adults, have created a world that so far has a lot of downsides, but has a lot of good sides. And I do see that our challenge is to educate the children on how they can make the world a better place. Because they are the makers, not us anymore. We have a little piece, but they are going to be here for a longer time. They already live in a world that there is no boundaries. There is no frontiers. You can just cross a country with the touch of your phone. I mean, mentally, not physically. But their connection to the world is way broader. Countries don't make sense, or they are starting not to make that much sense. Things, concepts that we live by don't make sense to them anymore. But how do we teach them to live in a world that we don't even know how to live in? Because we don't even know what it's going to be. And I think that's our challenge, providing them with a toolbox that they can use to make this world a better place. Because we are teaching them things that we don't know. But what we can do is give them base to fly and make this world beautiful.